Part 1. My name is Hana, and I never expected that being stranded would become one of my most treasured memories. The departure board at Singapore's Changi airport flickered with those dreaded letters cancelled, and I felt my carefully planned return to Tokyo dissolve like sugar in rain. The typhoon had grounded our flight, leaving dozens of passengers scattered through the terminal, like pieces from a puzzle that no longer fit together. Around me, travelers checked their phones with increasing desperation, voices rising in multiple languages as reality settled over the crowd like heavy fog. I had been in Singapore for a translation conference, 3 days of discussing the nuances of meaning across cultures, the impossibility and necessity of perfect communication. Now, facing an unexpected night in this gleaming cathedral of global transit, I wondered if the universe was offering me a practical lesson in adaptation. My apartment in Tokyo felt impossibly distant, my routine disrupted by forces beyond anyone's control. The familiar weight of my laptop bag and the small suitcase containing conference materials seemed suddenly absurd artifacts of a plan that no longer existed. Water flowing gently, I found myself in the airport's garden sanctuary, that impossible oasis of green, suspended between earth and sky. Orchids bloomed in defiance of the artificial light, while a small waterfall whispered secrets to the humid air. The space defied logic. How could such authentic tranquility exist within an international terminal? Butterflies danced in their glass enclosure, their wings catching the carefully calibrated lighting that mimicked natural sunlight. Here, in this pocket of tranquility, within the chaos of international travel, I encountered him. James sat on the bench beside the butterfly exhibit, watching exotic creatures dance behind glass, while trying to reschedule meetings via his phone with decreasing success. His shoulders carried the particular tension of someone whose carefully constructed plans had just evaporated. I noticed his hands, first gentle, but precise, the hands of someone who worked with delicate mechanisms. When he finally looked up from his phone in frustration, I saw eyes the color of Pacific storms, gray-blue and patient despite his circumstances. We were both refugees from our disrupted schedules, two strangers who might never have spoken under ordinary circumstances. But airports are places where ordinary rules dissolve, where the suspended time between departure and arrival creates its own gravity. His smile, when it came, transformed his entire face from business formal to genuinely warm. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, nodding toward the butterflies. "Makes you wonder if they know they're in an airport." Our conversation began with the universal language of travel: frustration, delayed flights, missed connections, the particular exhaustion that comes from existing in liminal spaces. But as hours passed in that garden, suspended above the world, our words found deeper channels. He spoke about his work with medical device manufacturers in Seattle, the way technology could heal across continents, how he traveled to teach local technicians to maintain equipment that would save lives in places he might never visit again. I told him about my translation work, how I spent my days building bridges between languages, between cultures that spoke past each other, without realizing they shared the same longings. We discovered we were both professional bridge builders in our own ways, connecting human need with technological solutions. Connecting meaning across the spaces between words. There was something profound about this recognition, as if the airport's disruption had been designed to bring together two people who understood the art of connection. The airport transformed around us as evening deepened into night. Shops closed their metal curtains like sleeping eyelids. Restaurants dimmed their lights, and the usual urgency of travel gave way to something more contemplative. Families settled into corners with blankets and pillows, creating temporary homes in this space designed for transition. Children slept across airport chairs while parents maintained quiet vigils, and elderly couples shared snacks, with the patience of people who had weathered many unexpected detours. We discovered the observation deck, where runway lights stretched into darkness like constellations fallen to Earth. The view was magnificent, Singapore's skyline glittering in the distance, while planes arrived and departed in slow choreography, carrying their passengers toward reunions and farewells we would never witness. James stood beside me at the railing, close enough that I could catch the faint scent of his cologne, mixed with the recycled air of international travel. "Do you ever wonder about all the stories?" he asked. "Every one of those lights represents someone going somewhere that matters to them." His voice carried a thoughtfulness that suggested this wasn't idle airport conversation. He genuinely pondered the weight of human movement across the globe. I found myself studying his profile against the terminal's lights, the way concentration softened his features into something almost vulnerable. The elderly owner, a Singaporean man with stories written in the lines around his eyes, served us coffee and told us about the thousands of stranded passengers he had witnessed over the decades. Lovers separated by visa problems, families racing toward final goodbyes, business travelers discovering that some delays become unexpected gifts. James spoke about his life in Seattle, the view of Puget Sound from his apartment window, where he watched ferries cross dark water like moving lights. He described morning fog that could make the familiar world seem mysterious, how the city's coffee culture had become his ritual anchor in a life of constant travel. His work took him across Asia quarterly, but he had never spent an unplanned night in Singapore, never had reason to explore beyond business districts and hotel conference rooms. I told him about Tokyo's rhythm, how the city breathed differently during cherry blossom season, how rain on my apartment windows created its own kind of music. I described the particular quality of light in my neighborhood during autumn, when maple leaves turned the narrow streets into corridors of gold and crimson. We were mapping each other's worlds with words, creating temporary geography that existed only in the space between us. Around 3 in the morning, when the airport reached its quietest hour, James asked about my work with a curiosity that went beyond polite conversation. I found myself explaining the impossibility of perfect translation, how every language contains untranslatable concepts, how my job was often about finding emotional equivalence rather than literal accuracy. Like komarebi, I said, the Japanese word for sunlight, filtering through leaves. There's no exact English equivalent. but the feeling exists universally. That's what I love about engineering, he replied thoughtfully. The language of physics is universal. A heart valve works the same way whether you're in Seattle, or Singapore or Tokyo, but your right human experience of healing, the cultural context of medical care, those things require translation. He paused, studying my face in the cafe's warm lighting. You translate emotions, not just words. The observation struck me as surprisingly perceptive. Most people assume translation was simply swapping words between languages, but James understood the deeper current show meaning flowed beneath the surface of vocabulary, how cultural context shaped every phrase. We talked about the loneliness of precision, how both our professions required us to understand nuances that others might miss, to be perpetual outsiders interpreting between worlds. When exhaustion finally claimed us in the early hours, we found refuge in the airport's sleeping pod separate spaces that maintained the boundary between connection and presumption. But I could hear his gentle breathing through the thin walls, a reminder that solitude could be shared without being violated. I lay awake for a while, processing the unexpected intimacy of the evening, the way a stranger had become familiar through nothing more than honest conversation and shared circumstance. Sleep came fitfully, filled with dreams of butterflies and runway lights, of words, floating between languages and hands, that built bridges across impossible distances. I woke to the sound of early morning announcements, the airport, stirring back to its diurnal rhythm of arrivals and departures. In the morning, we met again at the boarding gate, both slightly rumpled from our night in transit, both carrying something new in our expressions. James had brought coffee for both of us, remembering that I preferred it black, a small gesture that spoke volumes about the attention he had paid to our conversation. The morning light streaming through the terminal's massive windows was different from the intimate darkness we had shared, more honest, perhaps, but also more revealing of the returning reality that would soon separate us. The replacement flight was announced with mechanical efficiency, returning us to the world of schedules and obligations. James was connecting to Vancouver and then Seattle, while I would continue to Tokyo and the translation projects waiting on my desk. We sat together during the brief wait, not talking much, both understanding that our pocket of suspended time was closing like a book reaching its final page.